There's a lot of research coming out about this around this part of the brain called the anterior midcingulate cortex. And that part of the brain is shown to be very large in athletes, in marathon runners, in entrepreneurs. It's found to be very small in the obese, as being somebody who was obese. And what it shows is that it grows when you do things that you don't like to do, when you face difficulty, you overcome cancer, you make it out of a divorce, but you face the difficult things. When you're willing to face the difficult things, that part of the brain expands. When you avoid it, it gets smaller. And so it's tied very closely to the will to live. And so now that's why the whole cold plunging thing and doing the difficult thing first and all of that stuff, it's really growing this capacity to face life and its difficulties head on. And to me, there's a great quote that says, when the floods of life come, I want to be the one who built the ark, not the one who needs a ride.
Welcome again, friends, to the Blessings podcast. You are going to be blown away today by my guest, René Rodriguez. I met René when we were both guests on an Instagram show, The Paradigm Shift, with Craig Siegel and David Meltzer. And I noticed right away that René is a man of presence who does not waste words. He embodies the best of two of my favorite worlds, neuroscience and storytelling. And he has successfully marries the two in his work with leaders, companies, and people who desire to develop influence and make an impact in the world. An interesting thing about René is that his mother was at one time a nun. And I want to hear more about that. She decided to leave that life to start another one, which to me is a behavior very close to my heart because it's something I've done. And I think it's illustrating the fact that René would not be here doing what he's doing today if it wasn't for that decision. And I know a lot of us are wanting to make those types of decisions in our lives. So I love that he embodies that and that tradition in his family is strong. He's here to let us know that there is something very beautiful and deeply mysterious about exploring your backstory, and that we have a lot to offer with what we wield between our two ears. So before we dig into his life, I also want to mention he has a great book called Amplify, and we're going to explore a whole lot of interesting topics. I can't wait to see where this goes. Welcome, René.
Thank you so much. And as much as I've always known that concept, I've never applied that idea of that. What would I be doing if she was still a nun? Probably nothing, because I wouldn't be here.
Who would you be? Who would you be? You wouldn't even know. I don't know.
I don't even think I would exist if she was still a nun.
You wouldn't exist in your present form.
That's true. I'll take that one. I'll take that one.
Yeah, that's a fascinating place to start. Even before you were born, going back to where you were born. So I'm not even going to ask you about that. What was this all about? How did this happen?
Which one is the this?
Your
Which
mom,
this?
the nun.
Oh, so yeah. So she was born in Cuba and lived in 5 countries all before the age of 25. She was in Cuba before and after the Cuban Revolution. She was in Germany after the Holocaust. She was in the Dominican Republic as a nun on the border of Haiti. She was in Panama during the Panama Canal crisis. And the last one was in Las Vegas during the A-bomb testing, which was pretty crazy. Now, before the age of 25, that means your life is pretty influenced by war, by revolution, by change. And her whole world was, and her whole purpose, and it was until the day she died, was global peace and community. And so she felt that was the best way that she could do that. About 8 years after being at Adrian Dominican, thank goodness, she decided not to be anymore for my sake. And she went to pursue other ways of bringing global peace and community.
Okay. Very interesting. And so how did she meet your dad?
I've never met him. So from what I understand, he was also a, oh God, there's parts that I can share, parts I can't share because I don't know if they're true. So this is interesting. So from what I understand, he was very into working with migrant labor in Southern Florida, and that was one of her passions. And so they together did a lot of work to empower the migrant labor community into creating better living conditions, a better life, and dealing with the abuse and the racism and the drug use and the alcohol abuse and all of the things that came with that life. It was a slave life without chains. So people chose into it. And they were really about how do you get people to opt out and free themselves from that process.
From migrant labor.
Yeah.
How did your mom get here to Southern Florida?
So my grandfather was in Cuba with my aunt, my grandmother, and my mother, and he saw the Cuban Revolution was about to begin. knew that it wasn't good for his family. So he said, I got to get out of here. And so he decided to write a letter to the president of the United States at the time saying, if you can get me and my family out of this country, I'll come and fight for yours. And somehow I made it to the right person. And they pulled my grandmother out, my grandfather, my aunt, and my mother. And he served in the American Armed Forces for 8 years and finally landed in Homestead, Florida.
Wow. That's amazing. Imagine there were probably a lot of people who wanted to leave Cuba at that time and may have written similar letters. And for whatever reason,
Yeah, there's been an exodus for a long time. The revolution was going to be a rough one. And even after that, people still leaving and jumping on boats and makeshift rafts and floating across, putting their lives in danger, their families in danger. I've heard countless stories of it. It's a rough one.
have you been back to Cuba yourself to
I have
see it?
not. I have not.
Any
It's on the
desire?
top of the list, though. Oh yeah,
Oh, it is.
on the top of the list.
Interesting. What about your mother? Has she returned?
She did. She went back, I think, 3 times, if I'm correct.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So that's a really interesting beginning. So I assume you grew up then in the Southern Florida vicinity?
Yeah, Miami.
Okay. And Miami, like city, and how was your experience there as a child? Any significant memories that you have of that time that you can
Y-
share?
Yeah, my mother worked a lot. My father wasn't around, so I was raised by a lot of my family and also a Cuban family that was there that took me in when I was 6 months old. And so to me, in heavily raised in the Cuban community and the Cuban culture, and my family is mixed. Some of them are more closely tied to the Cuban culture. Some of them have assimilated a lot heavier. And so the fact that when I left to Miami at 7 years old was what drew me closer to the culture. Because when you don't have it at all, you begin to miss it. Of course, if you're around it at all, it stays. You don't appreciate it as much, I guess, maybe. But yeah, I remember the food, the music, the culture, the people, the family, uh, just yeah, everything was. I was just literally just there yesterday, so it's very nostalgic every time I go back.
And you said you left that at what age again?
7.
At 7. Now, I know I've heard you say that from the ages of around 9-ish to 13, that this is the time when your foundational value system is formed. And
Right.
so if you look back at that time of your life, I would say it seems like there was a big shift in your cultural experience at that time. So how did that affect your value system, and how that has played out into what happens with you today and how you are today?
I think it's an interesting piece. So that critical time period of 9 to 13, because I was living halftime Minnesota, halftime Miami until I was about 16 years old. I'd come back all summer. I'd live summers in Miami and winters Minnesota, which made no sense, of course, but it made sense because you had to go to school in Minnesota, and then summers were free. So I went back to my family and saw everybody there. But I think it did instill the family values in terms of the Latin family values. So around food was a really big one, and how you share a meal and cooking for one another, being there. There's a lot of those different pieces, and also just the ability to be resourceful and able to move and not so stuck. There was a home, but I also had to travel. I was flying back and forth by myself at a pretty early age, and so it taught you to be comfortable living in other people's houses and moving from place to place. As long as you could find your home and everything, it just made I think it just made me more resilient in a lot of ways.
Did you have siblings?
I did not. I've come to recently learn this last year that my father went and remarried and had a lot of other kids, and kids that are pretty similar to my age within months. So that was a interesting revelation.
So you never knew your father, but you did find out who he was.
From what I understand, yes.
Okay.
I
Interesting.
can't speak. I don't know it firsthand, so I can't confirm or deny what I've heard, but it sounds pretty compelling.
Okay. Was identity.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So how was your experience with forming relationships if you were effectively living in two places?
I think forming relationships. I had a hard time. I was a kid I was an outsider in Minnesota. I was a little bit bigger than the other kids by their standards. I was fat and overweight. You get made fun of. You get bullied. I wasn't there. Spoke a different language too. It's being in Minnesota at that time. There wasn't as much of a Latin community, so it was different. But I had an interesting view of what it was like to have a difficult relationship and what it was like to have people not have your back. It taught me how I didn't want people to feel, but it also drove me to, in a lot of senses, it drove me to be better. It drove me to say one day I'll show you. And It's not always the best driver, but it does move you and it does serve a purpose. And I was talking about there's being driven by purpose, but sometimes we're driven by spark. And a spark might be a negative movement in it, but that spark can be good enough to get you to move, and but it can also be draining on your life. And so I always say it's okay to get started maybe by a spark, but make sure you move that over to a purpose in some way, shape, or form. I think it drove me to continually be better because I had to rely on myself. I had to rely on my own motivation. I had to rely on my own patting myself on the back, looking myself in the mirror, because you're not being surrounded by people that were doing that, or maybe even doing the opposite. It taught you to be more self-reliant.
Did you go to college
I did. University of St. Thomas.
in St. Thomas, the island?
No, in
Oh,
Minnesota. Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
okay.
I wish that would have been fun.
And so at that time, were you aware of your drive to want to make an impact or to show them? And did that
I,
play out in,
that,
what you chose to do or what you chose to study in college?
that drive was played out in basketball.
Uh,
And it was played out in basketball up until my sophomore year when I got cut. And then I was lost and I didn't know what to do. Because here I was pushing towards something. I really didn't like school. I was going to school for behavioral neuroscience. And um, it was the neuroscience and the brain was fun, but the other classes were not. I didn't enjoy them. I didn't have relevancy. But it's just an immaturity thing. It was like, because now I spent so many years restudying what I didn't learn. But
mm,
I knew that I wanted to do something. I didn't know what. And then I was introduced to selling cookware. I was actually, what's interesting, I just got cut and I got a chance to talk to an executive for a very large company. And I said, what's the one thing I have to do to be in your shoes when I get older? And I was 18. And he looks at me and he smiles and he said, you learn how to sell. If you learn how to sell, you'll always be employed. And I didn't think twice about it. I got this letter in the mail said I've been selected because of my GPA to join this fast-paced sales and marketing company in the health and wellness industry. Now, I had a 2.7 GPA, so I don't know what they were looking at. I mean, I think it was a 2.3 probably at the time. And I said, "What's their fault? I'm supposed to go learn how to sell. This is selling, so I'll go do it." And it was to sell cookware door to door. What they told me, because I had to become actually to get into that school, I had to be a janitor for the first year in with their probation program. So cleaning cigarette butts, they were picking up cigarette butts, cleaning toilets, all that stuff. Gave you an appreciation for what it meant to keep a school clean, that's for sure. But I also got paid more than I've ever been paid. That summer I made like $938. It was pretty wild. And when the owner of that franchise for cookware sales came out, they said that he made 9,000 his first summer. I'm like, that's another zero. And it was like I needed an outlet for my competitive nature, for my drive, for my discipline. I didn't know where to put it. And I just thought, okay, if he did 9,000, I can do 9,000. And I just looked at him and I went up for my interview and I said, I'll do what you say, I'll do what you say to do when you say to do it with no questions asked. Now, what's interesting about that is that's the drive I had, but the foundation of that was I didn't have a father figure. And so to me, any sort of male input at that point, I was starving for it. And to the point that I would do what they say. And that served me really well because work ethic is something that I always had. I wasn't the smartest, the fastest, or the brightest, but I had work ethic and I could work hard. And I had been rejected my whole life anyway. So being in sales, I was like, oh, you do 10 presentations, you sell 3, you only get rejected 7 times. So the sooner I do 7, the faster I get 3 is all I thought. And so it was so like all of the previous issues trained me for this moment of excelling. And I put everything I had into it at 18, became number 5 in the United States, Canada, Mexico, and realized in that moment that, wow, okay, if you were undeniably valuable, you couldn't get cut. In basketball, you could get cut for whatever reason. But in sales, I could create an undeniable value by selling something. I could have been fat, skinny, tall, female, male, gay, lesbian. It didn't matter what I was. If I sold something, I created value. And because I created value, I was part of the team. And so I put everything I had into listening and dissecting and reading and learning everything I could from all of the gurus back then. And with this thought in my head of like, man, how cool would it be if someday somebody was listening to me?
Okay. I love that. I think sales is such an interesting industry, and the idea that it's a numbers game. Do you still find that that's true? That it's a numbers game? You do 10 presentations, you're going to get 3 of them?
I think everything in life is a numbers game.
Ooh.
And it's a beautiful thing. There's an understanding of a law of averages that plays out and it plays into our learning, right? There's a numbers game. How many times you got to fall before you learn how to ski? How many times you got to fall before you learn how to walk? How many podcasts you got to do before you feel like you're starting to nail it? In the beginning, it's going to be a lot. More failure in the beginning than there is success. But that's the value of it. If it was success immediately, it wouldn't be as valuable. And so when you start realizing the application of that in other areas, you start realizing that awkwardness is a requirement for growth. And so the awkwardness is another way of saying failure is a requirement for growth. And to me, if you realize that's just part of the equation, it's not like oh, I'm trying to avoid failing. No, no, failing is the path as long as you learn. And it's so cliched. We hear that so often that we almost build a callus to that idea. But if you can go back and execute on that fundamental reality that I'm not going to be good, just get out there and do your first podcast, get out there and do your first article, do your first talk. And it's okay that you fall flat on your face and you bomb and it was horrible. Good for you. Now you're in the game. But you did better than the person in the stands. At least the person in the stands didn't get humiliated, but they also didn't move. They didn't go anywhere. And so at least you're in the game. Now, what can you do better? Do it again. Get a little bit better. Get a little bit better. My good friend Flex Lewis is a 7 consecutive Mr. Olympia winner. And he tells a story about when he got in a motocross accident when he was a kid, almost had to amputate his arm. And this guy became 7 consecutive Mr. Olympias. The guy was an absolute monster. And he talked about how he said, I'm going to dedicate myself to learn how to do a handstand with an arm that you can't even use. And he tried and tried for weeks and he couldn't get it. But there was one time he got a half a second and he felt that half a second. And he came down and he fell after that. And he goes, that's all I need. That little taste of hope. And he went after that half a second for another week and he got it. And then he got a half a second, 3/4 of a second. And he goes, oh boy, here we go. But to know that's the plan, to know that all you need is a half a second of hope, a glimpse, a taste of it. And then that kept him going. Then he got a second, then a second half, then 2 seconds, then 3 seconds. And then you follow that path. All of a sudden, he's walking up and down stairs on his hands. He can walk around life on his hands because he stayed in that game.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I was.
Wow. So the ratio from success to failure changes the longer you stay in the game.
Absolutely.
And is it always, do you always have to go into something new in order to experience that same cycle of failure and improve the ratio? And so why wouldn't the person who stays in the game forever just always be successful?
I think that there's a couple things to it. One is I think that there's a plateau to everything, right? And so I think we're designed to achieve. I really think that we're designed to achieve. We're designed to see what we're capable of. At least that's when I think we're most alive. And those of us who have sought comfort and a place of complacency, we're living. But I don't know if there's a sense of fulfillment in that. And maybe there is, right? There's no judgment. We all choose this. But I think there's something beautiful when we test ourselves to see what we're capable of and whatever it is. And maybe it's test in your capacity to love someone. And that's scary. The more you love, the more vulnerable you are. And that's scarier than a handstand. That's scarier than getting rejected because it's the ultimate rejection. I'm rejecting who you are as an individual. And so there's all ways to think about this, in my opinion. But I think we're designed to pursue achievement. And in Maslow's hierarchy would say that's the self-actualization, right? The ultimate fulfillment. And so in the beginning, my assumption is I'm not going to be good at something in the beginning. So I'm not good yet. And there's that beautiful word of yet. And if you can just hold on to that little word, I'm not good yet. And so that changes everything. I'm not good is different than I'm good, not good yet. And there's a positivity, there's a reality to it. And there's a great ski instructor that he would always tell the story. He goes, okay, you train you for 10 minutes. And then he'd go, okay, go fall 10 times. And they'd be like, we don't want to fall. He says, sorry to tell you, there is no avoiding falling. So the sooner you fall, the sooner I can give you lesson 2. So go fall 10 times. You'll have new questions. And until you fall, you won't even know what to ask. So go fall. And you fall. How do I avoid falling on my butt? Because that really hurts. Okay, let's learn that lesson. How do I avoid this? How do I avoid that? And all of a sudden, that's great. There's all these next lessons. And you fall again. And then there's a new level of questions. And then we get good at something. Like I spoke 239 days last year. We're speaking so many times, but now I'm going, but I have to change this again. And we're entering new areas and new levels of awkwardness and new levels of growth that I would love to avoid, but I can't. There's no avoiding it.
Can you give an example? What are you doing that you're not afraid? I guess maybe afraid isn't the right word, but something you're doing that you know is going to be a challenge.
Online courses and online offerings. I've done those in the past, but doing them for real is one of them. We're doing a mastermind, our third mastermind in. We're doing funnel marketing, which is something that I've never been a part of. Everything's been referral based, and changing our fee structure. Saying no, that's a hard one. Saying no means that you trust there's more to come. When you grow up like me and everything is an emergency, and you know what it's like to be extremely poor, you don't like saying no. But then the price is paid by your family because you're gone all the time. And so there's a lot of transition, even in the middle of what's perceived, keyword, to be successful.
But it seems like what you're saying is that a hallmark to growth is change and challenge. And that
Mm-hmm.
reminds me of exactly what happened with your mom and how she made she made a lot of interesting and major changes having to do with moving from Cuba and avoiding a terrible fate, probably if she had stayed, and changing her life from a nun to being a mom and all kinds of wonderful things. But those big changes are the things that I think people are most afraid of. So, people listening who know that they're meant for something more, they have a bigger purpose, and they want to make a big change, how can you act in spite of fear? And how can people amplify their voices in the direction where they
Yeah.
really want to shine?
One is, I understand, I get the fear. So I want to empathize with those that are scared. It is scary. Holy wow, it's scary. And you have to make a decision that you have to be willing to act in spite of the fear. And you have to be willing to act in spite of that fear. Somebody says, when I have more confidence, I'll go do that. I'm like, unfortunately, that's not how confidence works. Confidence is never a precursor to achievement. It's the trophy of achievement. You do something without confidence, which is courage. You're scared, but you do it anyways. And at the end, you find a minor success, and life comes around and says, nice job. Here's an ounce of confidence. And then you invest that confidence into doing it again. You're still scared. You push yourself, and it comes back, and you do a little bit better, and life goes back. There's a little bit more confidence. You don't act, no confidence, period. And you have to be able to do that. And so when I realized that confidence isn't what I need to start, I need courage to start. And so then now we go, okay, then there's different levels to this, because change is probably the world I've spent most of my time in, especially my research in. Then you go, okay, so there's a lot of different things that drive change. There's a great book called Change or Die. And in that book, they outline a study, two studies that were done, and they were released at the Global Innovators Outlook Conference, as a conference that's put on every year by IBM. And they bring some of the greatest minds together to cover a certain topic. And this particular year was healthcare. And of a $2 trillion budget, healthcare, 80% of that budget was consumed by 5 behavioral issues. And I bet you anybody listening, and you could guess what they are: eating bad, not enough exercise, too much stress, drinking, and smoking. We know those things. So it's not a know-how issue. But how is this something we all know, yet we still fall into it? So then they go, okay, this is the CEO of Johns Hopkins University was displaying this. He goes, we thought maybe we need more motivation. So let's give them the ultimate motivator. You change or you die. That should be pretty motivating. So they walk in after the patients had angioplasties, $100,000 procedure that's completely reversible, by the way, with diet and exercise. They crack open the chest cavity, and they're in the recovery bed. The doctors come in and say, this is our moment of leverage. Let's scare them. Mr. So-and-so, you better change and eat better and exercise more, or you're going to die. There we go. There's the big piece. So they measured that. 9 out of 10 of those patients were back within 2 years for a second procedure. What they found is that fear of death, we far too easily go into denial of that. It's too morbid. There's so much more morbidness around our life right now in everything we do. If we were to focus on it, we wouldn't even live. So we're trained to, when a consequence is far away, that proximity is too far, we don't associate the activities, the actions. And so there's another doctor by the name of Dr. Dean Ornish, who came around and said, hold on a second, there's more to this change process. There's a spiritual component, a values component, there's a behavioral component. There's all sorts of other pieces that go with it. And they did a different thing. So it was with the University of San Francisco and the Mutual of Omaha. that did this. So they came in, an example of this, with the daughter would come in with the grandchildren in hand, and they'd go to the father, the grandfather, and say, Dad, why you really scared us? We were really scared. We weren't sure if you were going to make it. And of course, the father being tough, he said, honey, I'm good. I'm strong. Dad, you remember when I got married? He said, yeah, of course I did. Dad, it was one of my best moments of my life. And I remember being so scared and not knowing if I was doing the right thing. And I remember turning around and looking at you. And when you smiled at me, I knew everything was okay. And the father says, honey, Dad, you're going to make me cry. I love you. Dad, I don't share that to make you cry. I share that because if you don't change how you eat and how you exercise, you won't see your two grandchildren get married. That study produced 70% were not back after 3 years. And so when you look at change, and if you're listening to this and you're trying to make a major change, it will not be easy, and you have to embrace that. You have to find, in this study, what they said was the driver was the fear of loss of something tangibly valuable, immediately valuable. And the vivid image of not being there for grandchildren immediately takes us out of our own pain and into something else that's outside of ourselves. I need to be there for them. And so for me, I lost 102 pounds of fat over the last 3 years. It had to be a driver that was bigger than just me. Because if it was just me, I could easily say no. Well, I could sleep in this time. Well, let me just have that. Let me just go out to eat. It's easier right now. And so there has to be something bigger, and you have to have good people around you. It's so underestimated, the value of your network and who you spend time with. And so I started spending time with very healthy people, very healthy people. I'm talking about some of the best in the world. And you do that, and all of a sudden you start magically thinking differently. You start reaching for different foods, and your body starts changing. And of course, if you're around people that are drinking and eating poorly and partying and doing, guess what you start becoming? And go to what you know on this and start implementing those little elements and those little pieces.
When you were telling that story, it made me think about your process in your work and how you use that kind of technique of helping people to connect to something bigger than themselves to help them make other changes in their lives. You talk about the 3 steps: the framing, telling the
Mm-hmm.
story, then delivering the message, which is what you just did. And then
Mm-hmm.
also you have a way of tying it down or tying it to something significant. And you just took us through that process so beautifully. I can see your tricks. So, when you were going through the process of losing the weight, for example, what is it that helped you to realize the significance of that you had to do that? You had to make it work. You had to get to the end goal.
A couple different factors. One is, and by the way, I didn't even think about that. I was using the process. When you start learning the Amplify formula, it just becomes who you are, and you do it too. It's any good communicator is following a process. Whether we label it differently, there is a certain sequence that we speak in. But what drove me was interesting is the pandemic, and when the pandemic started, I was traveling so often, so I had every excuse in the world, and I was just like fat and happy traveling. And then I lost 100 events,
Oh, yeah.
and that's a lot to lose and to delete, especially entering your best year. And then I remember looking at Zoom and being on Zoom and going, wow, I don't like what I'm seeing. It forced me to look at myself. And I thought, okay, people are going to get irrational during this time period. And I'm seeing people use this as an excuse to just stay home and do nothing. I need to do the opposite. I called my trainer and I said, how's business? He goes, I just lost everybody. I said, great. You gained me. I'm going to hire you every single day of my life until this pandemic is over. And we're going to create a great turnaround. And so I did the opposite. And I knew that if I was going to be on camera, I had to change the aesthetic. It's just whether I like it or not, it reflected. It was also an integrity issue because here I am talking about change. Here I am talking about dealing with suffering in life and overcoming obstacles. And clearly, I can't even manage my own self. And the saving grace was that I had good content, I had good results in clients that I'd served for many years. But that pass was starting to run out. And I knew at some point it would run out. That I asked myself, would I even believe me? would I take advice from me if I can't even show any self mastery?
Yeah.
And the answer was no. And so that to me was the ultimate driver, is that I am a fraud. And
Wow.
sometimes when we talk about that, it's I am currently behaving as one. And that to me is the driver to drive me against. I had to take that and put it behind me to push me. Somebody say, well, that's not a good affirmation. No, no, that's affirming the truth in the moment. And I needed to shift that truth. I needed to be truly honest. And people don't understand affirmations. This isn't about affirming things that aren't true. It's about affirming the behavior that needs to be done to become who we want. And one is I need to affirm the fact that currently in my current behaviors, I am creating more of a fraudulent front. I am not congruent in my integrity is at stake. Okay, great. So now I affirm I am somebody who gets up every morning. I breathe, I work out. I am a healthy individual because I make good choices. And today I'm going to make great choices. And so you affirm the behaviors that lead to the desired manifestation. You don't talk about the manifestation. I am rich. But you didn't do anything to become rich. No, I am a disciplined fiscal business owner. That's different. So now I make
Yeah.
fiscal smart decisions. I make phone calls every day. I prospect, right? Those are affirmations that, if you actually do them, manifest some really cool things.
And they focus on process rather than the product. And this reminds me, a couple of things you've said have reminded me
Beautiful.
a lot of the work of Carol Dweck. And
Mm-hmm.
she talks about growth mindset versus fixed mindset, but she talks about the concept of yet, which I love because it's implying that you're at a future state where you're going to be different and change. And this all goes back to your whole idea of change and the idea of having to build up kind of a failure repertoire before you get to that success. And you're doing the same thing. And I love that you just got to the heart of the issue of why you lost the weight was because you had to be on camera because of the changes that were made from the pandemic to shift your whole business to being on camera. And that led you to question all of those things. That's just beautiful that you shared that because it really ties into everything that you're talking about. And it also makes me think about the idea of self-awareness. And I know that's a big part of your work. It's also a big part of my work. So I think self-awareness and self-discovery is the key to growth. And a lot of people believe that that they have a certain level of self-awareness. Oh, I know myself. I know who I am, but they really
Mm-hmm.
don't. And I've heard you talk about this, that there's a certain number of people who don't know. You obviously do a lot of work on this. And I think it's also ongoing. You
Yeah.
can't just say, "Oh, I'm self-aware," and then you're forever self-aware. You're not. It's an ongoing process. And everything you talked about was related to process. And that's the hallmark of growth. So I don't know if anything I just said sparks something you want to say.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it. It's the hardest part about self awareness is that we all think we are. And I think it's the reality is I think something like 90% of us think we're self aware, but the research shows about 10 to 15% of us actually are. And so I go, okay, so that means that it's probably highly likely that I'm not self aware. So I'm just going to pretend that I'm not self aware and be somewhat paranoid. And the scariest person is the one that says, no, I'm very self aware. Because then they just shut off the possibility that maybe there's something you're not aware of. And it goes back to even some of the basic things like Johari's window, right? There's things that I see and things that you see, things that I see, things you can't see, things that you can see that I can't see, and things that neither of us can see. And if you understand that life is full of those four quadrants, that maybe there's something else there that I'm not seeing. And I know too much about the sensation, perception, what we see, and how much of life we don't see and we don't get. There's so many dimensions of what's happening. Even when we think even this three-dimensional world, I can show you things right now that I can do that you will just not see. And it's right in front of your eyes. And same with me. It'll be done to me. And I'm like, wait a minute. And so when we have this positive paranoia of saying, maybe there's something I'm missing, what it makes me is open minded. It makes me more collaborative and it makes me open to new ideas. And in a moment that I can do that, I'm much more enjoyable. I don't know anybody who thinks I love know it alls. It doesn't work, right? But I love people that are smart yet open,
Yes.
intelligent and
And life
wise
is
but
so much more
collaborative.
exciting. Like, why on or how boring would life be if everyone really knew everything? I think what
Oh,
we know is just it's this tiny little speck of what's available to us, or
absolutely.
even beyond what's available to us. What'll
Couldn't agree
never be
more.
available to us.
Couldn't agree more.
So interesting. I love that so much. I geek out on all of those things. I also really love what you say about the idea of time. And this kind of ties into what you're saying about how you spend your time, the people you spend your time with, and the things that you have to be associating with in order to make that positive change. I love that phrase, positive paranoia, too, that you just threw out there. That is very interesting. But you talk about time and you talk about the idea that time is life, really. Time is life. Time is what's happening while you're living. And you're the kind of guy who cuts the chase. You don't waste really, I don't think you, I would say you probably don't waste any time. I imagine you do waste some time, but I don't know. So, can you talk a little bit about the idea of time, how people can get the most from their life and their time? Give us a
Yeah,
little.
as somebody who has been diagnosed with ADD, right? And so it's my
Oh,
life to manage it is full of tools and tricks and coping methods. But then there's also realizations as well. Do I waste time all the time? Yeah, I am by far from perfect in that. I think in business and in relationships, when there's a clear outcome, I don't like to waste time for either party. Right. And it's because I think that if we're clear on what we're trying to get to, let's get there. That doesn't mean we don't build relationships, because sometimes building a relationship is the biggest time saver there is. Hold off on business, build the relationship first. And so it's the holistic view of what efficiency would be. But I think when we talk about time, most people don't know what time is. If I were to ask you to define time, most people would sit there. They go, "Yeah, it's time. It's," and they sit there and they go, "Yeah." Even Thomas Aquinas was one of the greatest thinkers of all time. He said, "I know exactly what time is until someone asks me." It's very hard to describe. And I say, okay, so then I go, there's a fun exercise to do. I say, so think of a sentence or two. Think of one sentence with the word time in it and how you struggle with it. Like, I wish I had more time with my kids or something like that. So what's one sentence? The first one that comes to mind.
When I think of time, I use this little phrase, if you think you don't have time, then time has you.
So if you think you don't have time, then time has you. Okay. So what's a phrase that you struggle with time? I wish I had,
Obviously, I wish I had more time. I say that all the time.
yeah, wish I had more time to do what? Pick one.
To
Anyone. First
For
one. Just
me to build to build the things I want to build, to do the things I want to do, to
first. I
work.
wish I had more time to do I wish I had more time to do the things I want to do. So now, and if you listen to this, pick your own sentence for a minute. This is what helped me understand it. Now take that same sentence and cross off the word time, and now replace it with the word life and say that sentence again. Should I try to say that sentence again?
I wish I had more life. I wish I had more life. I wish I had more life to build the things I want to build, to be the
I
person I
wish
want
I
to
had
be.
more life with my kids. I wish people would stop wasting my life.
Ah, yeah.
I waste too much life. And the reason that it's so powerful, because it starts realizing that time is this finite thing, and that time is life. Even Benjamin Franklin said, "Do ye value life, then value time, because time is the stuff that life is made of." And so when you start realizing that time is such a valuable thing, that we don't get it back. If you invest in a course and it doesn't work, you can get your money back. But the time you spent, you cannot get back. And so I always tell people, I said, not only do I want you to get your money back, but I want you to get your life's worth. Because I can't give you the life that you've invested into this. I'm going to invest my life into this. You're going to invest yours. And that life energy right now. And I can't give that back to you. And so when you realize that, and then you realize even concepts. So let's go positively morbid for a minute. How many summers do you have left?
I really don't like to think that way. And I know where you're going with that. Yes. I don't
Well,
know.
I
Not
go,
many when you look
well, I
at it.
tell you, it makes me very present. Like, how many times is my kid going to come back over the summer? How many more?
Well,
Is it 30? Is it 20? Is it
yeah.
50? How many more weeks? And then you go, like, how many more Easters? Get really weird. How many more Christmases are we going to be there? And then what it does for me is, okay, it brings in this sense of hyper focus to go, this is a truly valuable moment. I think we know life through its opposite. I don't think about it. It doesn't make me sad. It makes me present.
Mhm.
And so in that moment, because also time is also very relative. And there's a lot, I mean, we've known, Einstein knew this. And the more you realize how time slows down when we do certain things and how time speeds up, at least the perception of time. And so when we're highly present, it can feel like an eternity, but can feel fast at the same time. And it can fly by when you're having fun, It can slow down. Somebody said time, the length of a minute depends on what side of the bathroom stall you're on, right? There's the relativity. If you got to go and someone's there, that minute can feel 10 days. Whatever works for you. There's a calendar that actually says takes your average life expectancy and it puts a little circle and it shows how many weeks you have left and you fill them in. And then you start looking at this. And to me, what it does is it gets you off your butt to go, okay, I'm wasting time. Wait, I'm wasting life. Let me get after the things that I love. Let me stop appealing to those that don't matter to me. Let me stop trying to live a life for others. And what life do I need to live for myself? It doesn't mean you can't serve others. But what am I trying to do? Why am I trying to please everybody? If there's no possible way that I can, how do I please myself, my family, my clients, my friends? What am I doing? Because I'm wasting this beautiful gift that I've been given.
I think that's a very useful way of thinking, and it's definitely a motivator. But on the other side of that, I don't think we should be beating ourselves up because we're not maximizing every single second of the day or doing something that's of extreme value. And also, I had a lot of time to think about that idea of how many summers am I going to have left? How many Christmases? Just recently in my own life, when my daughter, one of my kids, decided to spend Christmas elsewhere instead of coming home to me. And I was very tempted to say to her, do you know how many Christmases you are going to have left with your 82-year-old grandfather if you don't come home? I was trying to guilt her into coming home by using that. So what do you think about that?
I don't believe in beating yourself up over something. That's a rare occasion. Sometimes you need to beat yourself up because you did something wrong. Like I think shame has a role in life, just not an often one. And you don't live in it, but there's a role. If we removed shame and guilt, there'd be no moral compass internal of what gives us to do right and wrong. So there's a purpose for it. But people overuse shame and they overuse guilt. And I think your intuition and your feeling was right. And that wasn't a good place to use that. I trust that. And I hope it didn't sound like beating yourself up if you're not maximizing. I think we choose what is valuable.
Yeah.
And if you want something off the shelf, there's always a cost to it. Some people want bigger things. Some people say, you know what? Look at what I've got. I'm going to live in this massive gratitude of what I've got, which is another beautiful existence as well.
Right.
And when you live in gratitude of what you have, and it's not a black and white issue for me, right? It's not about always being in gratitude, but how do I leverage my gratitude to achieve more? And to me, the purpose of life is not happiness. It's not happiness. The purpose of life is to be of utility because most of life is not very happy and it's also very difficult. There's a lot of suffering in life. If you go volunteer your time and do something really big, it's difficult. It costs you money. So you're pounding hammers and you're hurting yourself and you're going away. You're probably losing money from work and things. But at the end of that, because you did something for someone else, there's a sense of beautiful fulfillment and joy. And so there's a lot of things for me. I want to maximize my talent and skill in service to the world. And then that means I've got to understand what my talent and skill is. If I spent my entire life trying to be happy, I haven't really helped many people. And I don't find fulfillment in just serving myself. Because if I did that, it's pretty hedonistic in that sense. And again, there's not a balanced approach, but I think there is a harmony in this somewhere. There's got to be harmony in somewhere. And you decide that tune though. Harmony means you play this tune, I'll play that tune, and we'll play this. And sometimes harmony is you got that tune down, and I'm going to go play this one because nobody's playing this tune. Not everybody can save the homeless, but I might be helping these people. But somebody else might have a passion for the homeless. Some people have a passion for special ed. I couldn't do it. But I also serve with a group of people that a lot of people don't serve. So we all are called to something. And we need to be able to listen to that without guilt, but then really put our energies into whatever that is that we have chosen.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And what do you think is the relationship between intentionally putting our energies into those things that we think are going to move the needle and also having a sense that wherever we are is where we're meant to be for some higher purpose?
I think there's beauty in both of those thoughts. And I think think about the extreme of anything. If wherever I'm at right now, and I didn't put any thought or effort into it, I could easily justify a smaller existence with that phrase. But I could also be in the midst of tragedy and say there's a reason why I'm here. And you find beauty in that. And so I think it takes thought and it takes us to really analyze what is the right tool, what's the right philosophy in this moment that I could do. And there's got to be an underlying sort of compass that helps us through that. Because I think that there's too much complacency. That means there's no movement or progress forward. I think progress is a good thing. Too much of that. But I think that for me, realizing I'm at the right place to learn what I need to learn so that I can do and move forward, that I'm all for. I think there's a lot of beauty in that. I think that tragedy happens for reasons for us. Tragedy and suffering is a beautiful thing because it teaches us to be compassionate. It makes us realize the contrasting things of life, because if you've never had any tragedy, how can you enjoy anything good? Because you have no contrast. And the only way I know the good is because I've experienced such depth of bad. And then the appreciation and the gratitude comes from that. And that's a gift.
Mm-hmm.
And life is full of it. And that's just part of it. But if people think, oh, this sucks, life is this way, well, I get it. But I know people that have been through horrific things and they come out just as beautiful human beings.
They do. I was
So,
thinking about this yesterday. I was attending a funeral, and the people that I knew that had experienced this loss had a very tough life. And I was thinking, it struck me as I was sitting in the church and just in that atmosphere, that they were special beings. People who go through extreme hardship or tragedy, I think, are very special beings because they have learned something amazing in the
mhm,
process. And I think that's for me, I believe that's one of the reasons why we're here, to learn and also to love.
I agree.
But learning certain lessons that progress us forward as a consciousness, as a species, I think makes sense to me. That is a purpose for
I
our
agree.
existence.
With you 100%. Did you hear about that study they did in Connecticut? It's
No.
2,700 near-death experiences. And they looked at that and they took all the reports back of people that came back to life. And they found three consistencies. One was they all saw the light,
Hmm.
right? They saw the light, and of course they were approached by relatives and loved ones that had passed. But the other two consistencies they were asked two questions that you just basically said. First one was, did you gain knowledge? Learn. And the second one was, did you expand your capacity to love? Not did you love more, but capacity to love. That's like, how do you expand capacity? To me, the ultimate expansion of capacity is through grace, the unmerited love, unmerited favor, unmerited forgiveness. People that didn't deserve it, they wronged you, they betrayed you, but can you still love and forgive them? And did I gain knowledge? Did I expand my capacity to love? And those two things, I think, are, like you said, advance myself as a consciousness, as an energy, as a soul, whatever you want to call it.
Hmm.
There's something really beautiful in that.
There is, and I think that's why we're here. It's so fascinating. I am a very big geek for near-death experiences. My father had a near-death experience, and he talks about that a little bit. He didn't have anyone asking him those questions in his experience, maybe that he recalls anyway. But he did, after his experience, come to, I guess, illuminate a purpose in his life. And my dad is a very like blue collar guy. He's an amazing man. I call him like MacGyver. He can do anything. He could make a fishing pole out of a string and a stick, and literally, and all kinds of things like that. But he learned that his purpose was to help other people who are going through the transition from life to death,
Ooh,
which is a very
wow.
deep thing for a blue collar meat and potatoes telephone guy from Pennsylvania. You know?
Love that, though.
Yeah. And he
That's
has done it many
a
times,
big
in
thing. Yeah.
particular with my mom. And it's crazy, I think, the depth of experience you can have when you're willing to really reflect on things and kind of step out of the everyday existence to consider that there's something beyond what we see, beyond the matrix, if you will.
Yeah. How beautiful of selfless act that is on your father's part.
Yeah, he's a great guy, my dad. I love
That's
him.
awesome.
I think one of the most interesting things about your work is the aspect of story. And I know that you teach people how to use story and storytelling, their own stories, other stories to connect, to help them in their work, in sales, to have influence in a practical way. But I know you're both very deep and also very practical. And I love that about you. But the storytelling thing is really interesting to me because that's the heart of my work. I think that this is the way that we connect, and that's why I enjoy helping people to share their experiences. And you talk about how when people tell their stories, it releases the kind of feel good hormones, the oxytocin, and that's how we create bonds with others and also with ourselves.
Mm.
So, I wanted to ask you a specific question about how people can learn to use stories and their own stories in order to move them forward in their work and in life. So, I'm going to tell you a little bit of my story, and I want
Sure.
you to see if you can tell me what would that kind of a story, how where would I go next with it? How could it help so that other people can think about their own stories and how they might use them to move the needle in their work and in their lives. So, here we go. All right.
Let's do it.
Once upon a time, I was a wife. I lived in the suburbs with my 3 little children, all under 5 years old. I had a husband. He did very well. I had a Land Rover with a third row of seats. We had a big old BMW 7 Series that we tooled around in, and we were building a 6,800 square foot house on a hill. I was working as a college professor, teaching writing. I was volunteering at my children's school. I was nursing my babies. I sewed all of my kids' Halloween costumes from scratch. I served on the board of directors of an arts organization. I had my photography featured in local magazines, and life was really great. It was very picket fence until the day that my mom developed a cough that wouldn't go away. And when we found out that she had lung cancer, my picture perfect life couldn't exactly stop on a dime. But by the time that she died, less than 6 months later, I was no longer the same person that I had been pretending to be. So fast forward to today. People who knew me then would not even recognize me. And I think everyone has a story like that in some way. So where would you take it from there?
So one, sorry to hear that, first and foremost. And secondly, that when we think about, I'm going to qualify this as storytelling in business is different than storytelling in relationships.
Okay.
So storytelling in relationships is you're going to tell me your story so I can get to know you, right? And then when there's vulnerability and we share the oxytocin and the rapport is built and the caring and relationships are built when we share vulnerable stories. Storytelling in business, because there is a profit component to it. And anybody who says there's not, well, there is. They've never run a business, right? And profit's okay because profit hires people. Profit can be reinvested to give, can cure cancer. Profit's a good thing, right? As long as it's done in a way that's good. And so when we're talking about storytelling in business, also people are much more mindful of their time. And so the big mistake people make in business is that you think about storytelling in business should be this: use a story to deliver a message of value. Don't use my time just to tell me a story. So in business, nobody cares about your story. What they care about is the value and the message and the moral at the end of the story. And it's illustrated in this concept of we all know somebody who's a really good storyteller. We also know somebody who just loves to tell stories. And we smile because you know that person. And so then we go, what's the difference? The difference is one thing. The person who's a really good storyteller, at the end of that story, we know there was something in it for us. I got something of it. There was a message, a moral, a tie down, something that was like, wow, that was really cool. I received something. So they used the story to deliver this message and to enter my heart and soul to get past all my resistance points so that I could really absorb it. When there's no lesson or moral, you just told the story for you. I got nothing out of it except the loss of time. And
So
so
you
now in
need to tie
relationships,
in the message. Now, would you tell a personal story like the one I just told and add on the message and the tie down in a business setting? Or would that
if
be the kind of story that you would want to reserve solely for relationship building?
so, here's the next question. The, the answer is this: what's the best golf club to use?
The one that hits the ball the far where I want it to go.
It's the one that's needed for the job at hand,
Yes.
right? So you say the one that hits it furthest. What if you're on the putting
Well,
green?
at
That's
first
the wrong.
furthest because that was my objective in my mind. But yes, I
There you
realized
go.
that
So then,
wasn't
so
always my
there you go. You
objective.
answer. your objective. And so the same is true with storytelling. What are you trying to achieve? And so you ask that question, who's my audience first? Right? And then what's my objective? And then I choose the story.
Yeah.
And if I'm
Yeah.
clear, because then, and that's context. So let's just pretend that, because you told a story of having all of these great things, and then a sense of this tragic moment of your mother, which kind of knocked you back, not to reality, but knocked you back into maybe a reprioritization of values,
A
right?
reflection, I think was,
Self-reflection.
yep, years long. Yep.
And so let's say that you were talking to somebody, a young up and coming professional that was ignoring their family,
Mm-hmm.
ignoring their health. Let's say they were ignoring their health. You might tell that story. And let's say you share the same story. And then I was brought to reality of the loss of my mother and what was going on. But all of those things didn't really matter much when you were there with your mother. And I guarantee you, my mother was not saying, man, I wish I would have had more money. I wish I would have worked a little bit harder. She probably would have said, I wish I would have spent more time with her family.
Mm-hmm.
And so as you're growing your business, Mr. and Mrs. Entrepreneur, I think pursuit of things is great as long as you don't sacrifice the things that you might regret later. And so now all of a sudden there's a message and a moral in there. I'm not telling you what to do, but maybe it might be a reminder in that process. Or let's say you tell that story, and let's say you're talking to, give me an audience for some, I'll give you an example. Give me an audience of some sort. Just make something up.
I'm thinking health related people, well, for that story, even like smokers or people who are not living a healthy life.
Okay. And then think of an objective that you're trying to achieve with this podcast.
Mm. I think with this podcast in particular, just helping people to reach a level of fulfillment. To, I think my ultimate objective would have to do with self reflection and looking at the self and being able to uncover hidden meaning in life, hidden things that are going to help.
So it sounds like even from the title, blessings, that you're trying to find the blessings in the lessons. Is that correct?
Yep. Yep.
And so
Yes.
then you can tell that story. And I always transition to tie down with this phrase. The reason I share that with you is this, that magical phrase.
Yeah.
So the reason I share that with you is this, is that the big lesson that I got out of that was, I was able to pursue and achieve great things. But the moment that my mother's life was clearly in a finite moment, there was a timeline now. It brought into reality the things that were most important. And quite frankly, some of the things that I may have forgotten in the processes I was building. And so I share that with you in hopes that as you're listening to this and saying, are your values in the priority that you want them to be? Not based on what I need, but based on what's important to you. Are there relationships that you might be ignoring that if you were to find out that they had a cough like my mother did, that you might change some things? What if you were to get ahead of that and make those changes now instead of waiting for life to remind you? So that's a way of doing a tie down based
Yeah.
on that lesson, that audience, and that mess, and that specific objective. And so when you think from that perspective in business, you don't think story first. You think, who's my audience? What am I trying to achieve? And how do I serve them? And then which story do I need? Because it might be a shorter version or it might be a longer version. And that's the frame. The story would be the frame. And so the concept is frame, message, tie down. And some people say, do you always have to tell a story? I said, no, sometimes it's just a word is a frame. Somebody says, hey, can you come to the party? And you say, no. So there's no frame. So now here's the thing about framing. If I don't provide a frame, my audience will make one for themselves because that's how they understand reality is through frames. We construct reality through frames of reference. So if I just say no, they go, wow, that was rude. It could be that, right? And some people are like, man, I appreciate you being honest. Some people come from different perspectives, different frames of reference. But regardless, if I don't frame it, I'm leaving it up to my audience to create one. But if I add one word in front of that, hey, can you come to the party? And I say, unfortunately, no. So now just that word sends all sorts of other signals that I really wish I could have done that. And out of respect that I do care, I wanted to be there, but unfortunately I can't. Just by adding that one word changes the entire meaning and perception of that message. That's the power of framing. Storytelling is by far the most powerful framing device.
And do you advise people to collect stories, to make a bank of stories
Absolutely.
so that they have them? Yeah. And
There's
I
so
mean, I
much.
in my work because for the purpose of self-reflection and personal growth, but it's also applicable, obviously, in business.
But you're teaching what I believe to be the most important leadership skill, which is self-reflection and self-awareness. And so what I tell people is the best leaders that we love are the best storytellers. And the best storytellers are also the most self-reflective. And so you're teaching the how of leadership by self-reflection, because then they can, and then you teach them how to use those stories in the context of business, as long as it says, here's why I share it with you. Now, because the unaware leader, the leader that has no self-reflection in their life is a pretty difficult, disconnected leader.
Yeah. Wow, thank you. That's very helpful, I think, because a lot of people are into storytelling and for both purposes these days. I know I have a lot of people in my world who are really interested in using that skill, and I think it's an amazing thing that you teach. So I was curious about you personally, if you could just answer a couple questions about who you are that you like and who you are that you don't like. And because I think that those are questions we can be asking ourselves. So who are you right now that you like the most? And who are you that you don't
Hmm.
like? Who do you want to become?
Who am I that I like? Let's see. I like the fact that I'm pretty clear on my purpose as to why I'm here. I feel pretty clear as to what I'm supposed to do. What I don't like is that I don't think I've cracked the code yet on how to scale that.
Mm,
And I don't like that I built a business that is dependent on me. That to me is the biggest failure that I have done. I was told to do things that nobody's capable of doing. Okay, I did that. And now when I want to go on vacation or I want to serve more people, darn it, I'm the only one that can do that. In that sense. And I don't mean that in a sense I'm the only person on the planet. No, it just in this specific methodology. And so we had a pretty big win. Came back just 2 days ago. Yesterday we came back last night, but it happened 2 days ago where we did our mastermind, and the whole goal of our mastermind was to make it non-guru centric.
mm,
It would make the audience the hero and our guest speakers the hero. And when we do our checkout, what was our biggest learning, biggest takeaway? We always it's usually, hey, Renee, what Renee talked about here, Renee did this, Renee did that, and it's all great for my ego. We were not on this time, and I didn't come up once. And I started smiling, and I said, this is the first time. I said, this is finally we created something. Now they acknowledged my role in bringing the people together, but they acknowledged, and that was only a couple times. It's more like what I learned from Flex, what I learned from LaShawn, what really I learned from Elizabeth, and what I got from Maddie, what I got from, and it wasn't what they got from Renee. It wasn't that I didn't add value, but it was about, I was really trying to create a space that it wasn't about me. And not saying it was about me, that I always was about me, because I don't think I'm that person, but it was something that I could create a space for others to shine.
that's beautiful. And what is your purpose? Why are you here?
Oh, it's a long one.
In a nutshell?
I touched on it a little bit. We talked about that I'm somebody that I think that there's some cool lessons to be found in the Bible. Am I a religious person? Not at all, but spiritual, obviously. But I think there's a lot of religious texts that find a lot of value. And one of them was in the symbolic story of creation. 6 days work, 1 day rest, not 5 days work, 2 days rest. And so there's a sense of hard work that goes into it. It's probably one of the most common words in the Bible is the word toil, sweat of the brow. So work is a spiritual thing. There's something beautiful about work, and it's only 1 day rest. It's not a 4 hour work week. There's something there. There's also one story came up 4 times in all four gospels, the story of the talents. God gave you one, give another person three, another person five. Come back, do something with them. Person that had five had 10. Person that had three had six. Person that had one buried it. Said that God lost his mind. And he was just super upset. I gave you a gift, he didn't use it. And so they go back to that piece and you say, okay, there's this, the end of each day upon creation, he asked himself one question: did I do good? Self-reflection, leisure. The true highest form of prayer is self-reflection. Because without self-reflection, you don't know if you've been a good person. And you can't go back and apologize. You can't go back and say, you know what, I was wrong. Or you can't continue, that was good. Gaining knowledge, expanding my capacity to love. So it's really to utilize the talents that God has given me and to expand, to gain knowledge, expand my capacity to love, and to further in his creation.
I've heard you say that, and I love that so much, that self-reflection is the highest form of prayer. Beautiful.
In my
So what
opinion.
would you say are the biggest lessons that you've learned in life?
Oh, so many. The biggest lessons that
If you
suffering
could
is a
only share one to go to pass on for posterity, what would it be? Or
that
two?
suffering is a beautiful thing. I'm going to go back to that. That suffering is a beautiful thing, and it needs a rebrand because
Mm,
we go through it all the time. Why not find a better way of looking at it?
well,
Life is
that's what
hard. I had to get up this morning and work out. It was not. I didn't want to, but I went and suffered in the gym so that I felt good and I can live longer for my kids and my wife. Period. And so you suffer. And there's also, and this is the coolest part. There's a lot of research coming out about this around this part of the brain called the anterior mid-cingulate cortex. And that part of the brain is shown to be very large in athletes, in marathon runners, in entrepreneurs. It's found to be very small in the obese, as being somebody who was obese. And what it shows is that it grows when you do things that you don't like to do, when you face difficulty, you overcome cancer, you make it out of a divorce, but you face the difficult things. When you're willing to face the difficult things, that part of the brain expands. When you avoid it, it gets smaller. And so it's tied very closely to the will to live. And so now that's why the whole cold plunging thing and doing the difficult thing first and all of that stuff, it's really growing this capacity to face life and its difficulties head on. And to me, there's a great quote that says, when the floods of life come, I want to be the one who built the ark, not the one who needs a ride. And so when you look at it from that perspective, now there has been many times in my life when the floods of life come, I've needed a ride. And if you need a ride and you're listening to this right now, please ask to those who have built. And when they give you a ride, then devote your life to building your own ark so then you can help those that need a ride when they're drowning. Those are the lessons.
beautiful. What about your blessings? What are you most grateful for?
My kids, for sure. My wife. And the self-awareness that and the lessons that I've been given.
I love that so much. So your book is called Amplify Your Influence.
Mm-hmm.
And where can people connect with you?
Probably easiest is to go to meetrene.com and or follow me on Instagram, Learn with René. We do a video every single day on this. There's no selling or anything. It's just pure micro learning. And so we take a new concept, new topic every day, and we drive it home.
Mhm. Yeah, and you have a fantastic YouTube as well with a lot of really cool short videos that are really useful.
We're starting to put some energy on it this year. This year, so 24 is LinkedIn and YouTube for us.
Okay. Yeah, it's nice. I love it. I was binging them the other day. Because
Cool.
you get it started, it's very inspiring. It's very motivating. So,
Thank you.
wow, what a conversation, Renee. Thank you so much. You've given us so much value. And I just want you to know how much it means to me that you've shared yourself with us today. I know that you don't waste your time. And I know that what you do is very important to you. And so I'm very honored and grateful that you've chosen to spend your time here with me and with us. I don't take that lightly at all. And I appreciate you very much.
Thank you. The honor is all mine. Thank you so much. And I appreciate what you're doing. Keep doing it. You're putting a great message out there.